The rain fell like tears from heaven that night, cold, unrelenting, and merciless. Inside the sterile white room of St. George's Hospital, the faint beep of a heart monitor echoed softly against the silence of fear. On the hospital bed lay Isabella Trent, the only daughter of billionaire real estate mogul Charles Trent. Once the vibrant face of charity galas and fashion covers, Isabella was now pale, fragile, and fading. The clock beside her bed ticked like a cruel reminder. 3 days. That was all she had left before her body would give up completely. The doctors had tried everything: experimental drugs, overseas treatments, even offers of transplant surgeries, but her rare genetic heart condition was progressing faster than anyone expected. She was just 21, but her heart function was less than 20%. 3 days, her doctor had whispered with trembling eyes, unless a miracle happens. But miracles weren't something money could buy. Outside, reporters swarmed like vultures, hungry for the tragic end of a billionaire's daughter. Inside, her father stood helpless, his tailored suit soaked in grief, his eyes hollow with guilt. For years, he had built empires and crushed competitors, but now, he couldn't save the one person who truly mattered. He held her cold hand, whispering, "If I could trade everything, I would." And in the middle of that hopeless night, life outside those hospital walls carried on. Just a few blocks away, under a broken streetlight, a barefoot boy named Arlo rummaged through a trash bin behind a bakery. He was 15, skinny, and bruised by the world. His torn shirt clung to his rain-soaked body as he searched for anything edible. The city didn't notice boys like Arlo. They were invisible, ghosts wandering between hunger and survival. But fate, in its strange and silent ways, was already writing the unthinkable. Dizzy before the story unfolds further, if you believe in kindness, miracles, and second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Stars of Kindness. Your support helps spread stories that remind the world, one act of compassion can change everything. Dizzy. The next morning, the city woke to the news of Isabella's failing health. Online headlines screamed her countdown. Crowds gathered outside the hospital praying, gossiping, hoping. Inside, she stared weakly at the raindrops on her window. Her once golden hair had lost its shine, her face gaunt, yet her spirit, still gentle. She had grown up surrounded by luxury, but deep down, she had always been different. Kind, soft-hearted, and always reaching out to help others. Before she fell ill, she used to visit orphanages quietly, donating food under a fake name. One of those orphanages happened to be the same one Arlo had escaped from years ago. The streets had hardened him, but deep down, there was still a flicker of goodness left, a spark he had never let die. That spark would soon meet Isabella's fading light. That afternoon, as Arlo wandered through the alleyways near the hospital, he noticed a small white envelope fluttering by the curb. Curiosity pulled him toward it. Inside was a photo, an old picture of a smiling young woman with golden hair holding hands with several children at an orphanage. On the back, scribbled in fading ink, were the words, "Kindness is the only wealth worth keeping. Isabella T." Arlo's eyes widened. He remembered her. The lady who once visited his orphanage, bringing food and blankets when no one else cared. She had knelt beside him once and told him he was special. That was years ago. He had thought she was just another volunteer, but now, her photo was all over the city. "She's dying," he whispered to himself as he saw her face on a newspaper stand nearby. Something stirred inside him, an emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. Gratitude. The kind of gratitude that burns. He remembered the warmth of her eyes, the way she'd smiled at him like he mattered. And suddenly, he couldn't just walk away. That night, as thunder rolled across the city, Arlo stood outside the hospital gates, drenched again, clutching the photo tightly. He didn't know what he could possibly do. He had no money, no family, no influence, but he had something no one expected. A story. Inside the hospital, Isabella's condition worsened. The machines beeped slower. Her father broke down outside her room as doctors shook their heads. "Her heart's too weak. We need a donor immediately, but there's no match in the registry." And that was when Arlo, trembling and barefoot, sneaked past the hospital staff. He didn't even know how he got inside. Maybe fate opened the doors for him. Maybe someone upstairs still cared. He found himself standing outside Isabella's ICU room, staring through the glass. She looked peaceful, like she was already halfway to heaven. A nurse spotted him and tried to escort him out, but before she could, Arlo pleaded, "Please, I knew her. She helped me once when I was a kid. Please, I just want to see her one last time." His voice cracked under the weight of desperation and truth. The nurse hesitated, then sighed, perhaps touched by something in his tone. "Just a minute," she whispered. Arlo stepped in quietly. The air smelled like medicine and sorrow. He stood by her bedside, tears filling his eyes. "You saved me once," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Now I wish I could save you." He didn't know that, in that very moment, the hospital's new experimental heart-matching AI had just identified a possible donor, a living match who shared a rare genetic marker. A boy, age 15. No listed guardian. Blood type identical. Name: Arlo Reyes. Outside, lightning split the sky. Fate had just drawn an impossible line between two souls who once crossed paths in kindness, and were about to do so again in sacrifice. Sparkling heart, if this story has already touched your heart so far, please make sure to hit the like button, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who believes in miracles, and subscribe to Stars of Kindness for more real, emotional stories that remind us what humanity truly means. Sparkling heart, the storm outside had not stopped. It was as if the sky itself refused to let go of its grief. In room 207, the doctors moved quickly, voices tense and eyes sharp, as Isabella's condition dropped to critical. Her heartbeat, once a fragile rhythm, was now slowing like a fading melody. Machines screamed warnings, and nurses rushed in and out like shadows fighting against time. Her father stood frozen near the doorway. He was a man who once commanded entire cities, yet now, he couldn't command the one thing that mattered: fate. "Please," he whispered to the heavens, "don't take her from me." Down the hallway, Arlo sat on a hospital bench, his head buried in his hands. He was exhausted, drenched, and trembling, not just from the cold, but from the weight of what he'd heard moments earlier. A doctor had been speaking nearby, unaware that a skinny boy was listening. They mentioned a perfect donor match, someone whose blood type, age, and heart condition alignment made them the only possible hope. It was him. He couldn't believe it at first. A nurse later confirmed it quietly after running his details, stunned that a homeless boy could be the miracle they'd been praying for. "You're a match," she had whispered. "But, Arlo, do you understand what this means?" He did. It meant his life for hers. A full heart transplant from a living donor was impossible unless the donor didn't plan to live afterward. He walked aimlessly through the quiet hallway, passing bright posters about hope, recovery, and second chances. They all felt cruelly ironic. He had spent years trying to survive, and now, life was asking him to give his survival away. He stopped at a vending machine, staring at his reflection on the glass, tired eyes, hollow cheeks, and a bruised jawline. The world had given him nothing. He was born forgotten, lived invisible. But she once saw him. She once called him special. He remembered that afternoon at the orphanage when she handed him a piece of bread and smiled, "You're stronger than you think." No one had ever said that to him before. That small act of kindness had kept him alive through nights of hunger and fear. And now, she needed something he could give. Something only he could give. He clenched his fists. If I can save her, then maybe my life meant something after all. The next morning, drive. Patel entered Isabella's father's office with trembling hands. "Sir, we found a match." Charles Trent's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? Who?" The doctor hesitated, voice low. "A boy, 15. Homeless. Name's Arlo Reyes. His heart is compatible. But he'd have to." Charles froze mid-sentence, his breath catching. The unspoken truth hit him like a train. The boy would not survive. He turned away, pacing, torn between guilt and desperation. You can't ask a child to do that," he said. "But destiny has its own cruel mercy." Before he could make a decision, Arlo himself appeared at the doorway, eyes steady despite the fear. "You don't have to ask me," he said softly. "I already know what I want to do." Everyone turned to look at him. This thin, barefoot boy who looked like he hadn't eaten properly in days, standing in front of one of the richest men in the country. Why? Charles asked, voice breaking. Why would you do this? You don't even know her. Arlo swallowed hard. Because once, she saved me. Not with money, not with food. She made me believe I mattered. She made me feel seen. He took a deep breath. And now she needs someone to see her too. She deserves a second chance. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the cold hum of machines seemed to fade under the weight of his words. The next hours were a blur of consent forms, discussions, and disbelief. The medical board hesitated, unable to process a boy offering his life so selflessly. But Arlo's resolve was unshakable. If I die, he said, at least it'll mean someone gets to live. Someone who showed kindness when the world didn't. Charles sat beside him later, eyes red. I can't let you do this, he whispered. You're just a child. Arlo smiled faintly. Maybe. But being alive isn't about how long you live, it's about what you live for. For the first time, Charles felt something break inside him, a wall he'd built his entire life between wealth and humanity. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small cross necklace that belonged to Isabella as a child. If you really want to do this, keep this with you, he said, voice shaking. She used to wear it whenever she wanted to feel safe. Arlo looked at it, tears glimmering. Then maybe, she can have it back soon. That night, as the city lights shimmered through the rain-streaked windows, Arlo lay on the hospital bed next to the operating room. Nurses checked his pulse, IV lines, and charts. His heart was strong, too strong for a life that had suffered so much. Isabella lay in the adjoining room, her heartbeat flickering weakly like a dying candle. Between them stood a wall of glass, two worlds about to exchange everything. He closed his eyes and whispered, You gave me life once, Isabella. Now it's my turn. The surgical lights turned on. Machines beeped. Surgeons prepared for the most delicate, dangerous procedure they had ever attempted. Arlo's small frame looked fragile under the white sheets, but his face was peaceful. For the first time in his life, he wasn't running from anything. He was running toward something, purpose. As the anesthesia began to take effect, Arlo's last thoughts were of her smile, the day she had given him hope in a world that never gave him anything. And just before darkness took him, he whispered, Thank you, for seeing me. Outside, Charles stood watching through the glass, tears streaming down his face. His empire, his billions, his power, all meant nothing now. The only thing that mattered was a boy who had nothing, yet was giving everything. The surgery began. Hours passed. Machines hummed. Nurses moved with precision. Every second felt like eternity. And then, just as the sun began to rise, the monitors in Isabella's room started to beep stronger. Her pulse, steady. Her breathing, normal. The impossible had happened. Isabella Trent lived. But in the room next door, silence fell. The machines connected to Arlo stopped one by one. His body, small and pale, lay still, peaceful. A faint smile remained on his face, as if he had simply fallen asleep after winning the hardest battle of all. When the first light of dawn touched the windows of St. George's Hospital, the storm had finally passed. The sky was quiet, the city still, and for the first time in weeks, the sound inside Isabella's room was not the flat line of despair but the steady, rhythmic beat of a living heart. She was alive. The doctors had done the impossible. The transplant had worked. Her frail body, once moments from death, was now breathing strong, warm, alive. Her father, Charles, stood by her bedside, tears slipping silently down his cheeks. He had spent his entire life chasing wealth, yet this fragile heartbeat, was the only treasure that had ever truly mattered. Hours later, Isabella stirred. Her eyelashes fluttered, her lips parted slightly, and she whispered, Dad. Her voice was faint, like a ghost returning from another world. Charles rushed forward, clutching her hand. I'm here, sweetheart. You're okay now. You're safe. She blinked slowly, confused. What happened? I remember darkness. Then light. Then nothing. He hesitated. His heart clenched. How could he tell her that the miracle keeping her alive had come at the cost of another life? That somewhere in this same hospital, a young boy's heart had stopped beating, so hers could start again. For days, he couldn't speak of it. The doctors only said her recovery was remarkable. The world outside called it a miracle. News stations broadcast her survival, calling it the miracle that money couldn't buy. But inside her father's soul, there was no celebration, only grief wrapped in gratitude. And then, one quiet evening, Isabella found the small silver cross that had been placed on her bedside table. She recognized it immediately. It was hers, but she hadn't worn it since she was 16. Where did this come from? She asked softly. Her father froze. He had hoped she wouldn't notice yet. But she had always been too perceptive, too kind, too connected to things that truly mattered. He sat down beside her and said in a trembling voice, "It came from the boy who saved you." Her heart skipped a beat. Not metaphorically, but literally. The boy. Charles nodded slowly. His name was Arlo Reyes. He was 15. A street kid. Homeless. He was the only donor who matched you. He volunteered. His voice cracked on the last word. He said you once visited his orphanage years ago. Said you made him believe he mattered. And when he found out you were dying, he wanted to give you his heart. Isabella's hands trembled as she clutched the cross. Tears filled her eyes before she could even speak. "No," she whispered. "He was just a child. He shouldn't have." Her father interrupted gently. "He wanted to. He said saving you would make his life mean something." And that was when Isabella broke. The sobs came uncontrollably. Raw, deep, aching sobs that filled the quiet room. The weight of his sacrifice crashed into her chest like a wave. She pressed the necklace against her heart, the same heart that had once belonged to the boy who had nothing, but gave everything. Days passed, but sleep never came easily again. She kept dreaming of him. Of a boy with kind eyes, standing under a broken streetlight in the rain, smiling faintly before fading into light. Each morning, she woke with tears on her face. Months later, when Isabella finally recovered enough to walk, she made a decision that would change her life, and countless others. She asked her father to take her somewhere. Not to a villa or a private island, but to the exact orphanage where she had once met that little boy. When she arrived, barefoot children ran around the dusty yard. Their clothes were torn, their faces dirty, but their laughter was pure. The orphanage was falling apart, but the spirit inside it was alive. Isabella stood there silently, her heart pounding with the rhythm of the one she now carried. She walked to the corner of the yard and found a small wooden swing. The caretaker, an elderly nun, smiled faintly and said, "That's where Arlo used to sit every evening. Said he liked to watch the sunset. Said it made him feel closer to heaven." Isabella knelt beside the swing and placed the silver cross on the seat. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "You didn't die, Arlo. You're still here, in every beat, in every breath." That day, she announced a foundation in his name, the Arlo Heart Foundation, a program dedicated to funding medical care and housing for homeless and orphaned children. She poured her father's wealth into it, turning pain into purpose. Every hospital built under the foundation's name had one line carved at its entrance. "Kindness is the only wealth worth keeping." The same words Arlo had once read on the back of her photograph. Years later, Isabella would speak publicly for the first time about her story. Her voice trembled as she told a crowd of thousands, "A boy who had nothing gave me everything. He taught me that love doesn't come from riches, it comes from sacrifice. I live every day to honor the life that gave me mine." The audience stood in silence, many wiping tears from their eyes. She looked up at the sky, where the sunset burned gold, and whispered quietly so only she and the heavens could hear. "Thank you, Arlo, for seeing me when no one else did. For reminding me what it means to live." The wind seemed to whisper back through the trees, a soft, tender echo. And in that moment, somewhere beyond this world, a boy with kind eyes smiled. Sparkling heart, if this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stars of Kindness. Comment below what you felt, because stories like these remind us that even the smallest act of compassion can change a life forever. Sparkling heart.